In the last video lesson, I talked about the Great Compromise and how it established a bicameral legislature in the United States. And I also talked about the Three-Fifths Compromise, which determined how slavery was going to factor into representation in Congress. So we're going to go a little bit further today into the Constitution and look at those three branches of government that are established. So to start, let's talk about the separation of powers. Separation of powers is defined as a system of government that distributes powers across institutions in order to avoid making one branch too powerful on its own. So our Constitution establishes three branches of government. In Article 1, it's the legislative branch, which is Congress. Article 2, it talks about the executive branch, which is the president. And Article 3, the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court. And each branch has its own powers and responsibilities, and that is to avoid making one branch more powerful than the other. Under the system of checks and balances, each branch has powers that can prevent the other branches from making policy. So you can look here at the powers that each branch has. So the legislative branch makes the laws, the executive branch carries out the laws, the judicial branch checks laws for constitutionality. So all of that being said, Congress can pass laws, okay? So if a law goes through both houses of Congress and is passed, then it goes on to the president where he can either sign it or veto it. That is the executive branch's way of checking the legislative branch. The same goes with the executive branch and the judicial branch. So the president can issue an executive order, and the judicial branch is able to check those for constitutionality. So that's what's meant by checks and balances. Now, separation of powers goes even further in the Constitution in that it creates a system of federalism. And federalism is the sharing of power between national government and state government. So national government has its own set of powers, state governments are given their set of powers. And separation of powers and federalism are going to create multiple access points for citizens to influence government. So they can influence both national government and state government. So these are just some of the national powers and state government powers. So you can see that the federal government has the power to coin money, tax imports and exports, establish and regulate the postal system, whereas state governments establish and maintain schools, establish local governments, issue licenses. You can read those for yourself, but you can also see that there are some concurrent powers, which means that the national government and state government share those powers. So the power to levy taxes, borrow money, administer courts. So you can look through these charts and just get a little bit better understanding of what are national powers, what are state powers, and what are concurrent powers. So let's talk about the legislative branch. So this is Congress, and again, this is Article 1 of the Constitution. And this branch is responsible for making the laws. So both chambers of Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate, have to work together to pass laws. So the House of Representatives represents the people. Remember, when it was established, we talked about how it was going to be based on population. The number of representatives each state has is based on the population of the state. So it's representative of the people, whereas the Senate is designed to check the passions of the people. So the founders did not want it to be easy to just pass laws, okay? So we as people can react to things that happen, and the founders didn't want laws to be passed just based on reaction or feelings to something that happens. So they wanted it to be very difficult to pass laws, and that's why that in order for a law to pass, it has to go through both chambers of Congress. So specific powers given to Congress in Article 1 are known as express powers or enumerated powers. So it means the same thing if you see express powers or enumerated powers. These are the specific powers for Congress that are listed in the Constitution. Article 1 also includes the necessary and proper clause, which gives Congress the powers to carry out enumerated powers. So my favorite example for this one is that an express power of Congress is that they have the power to raise and maintain an army. So using the necessary and proper clause, they also have the power to enforce a draft. Okay, so if they have the power to build and maintain an army, then in turn they also have the power to issue a draft, because that would be a power necessary to carry out that enumerated power. Now, you might also see the necessary and proper clause as the elastic clause. Just know that that means the same thing. Now, powers of the federal government that go beyond enumerated powers are called implied powers. And this is just some examples of implied powers. So these are some of the implied, the expressed powers or enumerated powers of Congress, and then the implied powers. Okay, so it's implied that they are able to do this as well. So the executive branch. The delegates at the Constitutional Convention settled on a single executive to carry out the laws that are passed by Congress. So they settled on the president. Presidential powers include vetoing legislation. So again, laws passed through Congress, they come to the president. The president has the option to pass them or veto them. The president serves as commander-in-chief of the military. He oversees the bureaucracy, and we're going to talk more about the bureaucracy and all of those agencies, but just think about those cabinet departments. So Homeland Security, Treasury, Secretary of State, things like that. He is going to oversee all of those people. And the president can also make foreign policy. Now, citizens do not vote directly for the president. They're elected through the Electoral College. And again, we're going to talk about the Electoral College more in a later unit. But just know that we, as citizens, don't vote directly for the president in a presidential election. We actually vote for electors who, in turn, vote for the president. And last is the judiciary. So the Supreme Court is the highest court in the land. Just as the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court of the land. Lower courts are designed by Congress, so that's a power given to Congress to set up any kind of lower courts. Federal courts have jurisdiction over disputes between national and state governments, between states, and between citizens of different states. Okay, so that's the jurisdiction that those courts have. And the Constitution does not expressly provide for judicial review. And judicial review is that idea of the Supreme Court being able to check laws and checking executive orders for their constitutionality. Does this line up with the Constitution, or does it go against the Constitution? That's going to be established by Marbury v. Madison, and that's one of those Supreme Court cases that we'll talk about in another unit. But that is the court case that established judicial review and allows the Supreme Court to check laws and interpret laws for constitutionality. And that is where we are going to stop with this lesson.